Hello, friends. I'm Maria Baños Jordan, president and founder of the Texas Familias Council. And I'm very blessed and honored today to come to you with a couple of amazing women who are friends and colleagues, Pastor Rhonda Rogers and Pastor Alyssa Stebbing, both with the Episcopal Diocese. And I've thankfully met them at a time when we in Texas were going through some very difficult times with natural disasters, hurricanes, and then the pandemic. So we've been out and about trying to keep families and communities together and to really just be positive forces in the community to encourage other women and families to continue working their faith and connecting to their communities. So I will briefly introduce you and have them talk a little bit about their work in the church and in their communities, because they both have been very, very busy. Pastor Alyssa Stebbing is, I believe, Alyssa, were you born in Texas or in?
I was born in Texas.
That's right.
I grew up in New Mexico and Colorado.
Okay, so she is a Texas girl, and she is fluent in Spanish, by the way. So that has been very, very beneficial in working in some of our communities. But she's been newly ordained this year, and she's been working in a beautiful church in South Houston. And so I'll have you tell a little bit about your church, if you don't mind.
Okay. I am serving at St. Paul, San Pablo Episcopal Church, and it is in an area where the community has changed quite drastically. Is considered underserved, still recuperating from disasters from years ago, before COVID even hit, and then of course still coming back from COVID. And so I serve a congregation that's primarily now Spanish speaking, as is the community. And we offer services for the unhoused twice a week, all the way from like laundry and showers and haircuts to hot meals and services through Harris County Health and the Houston Food Bank. And then on Wednesdays, we serve an average of 250 families. I've seen it go up a couple of times, like 400 once in a while, for food distribution through the Houston Food Bank. And a lot of the parishioners we have are first generation immigrants. Some are undocumented asylum seekers that come in and out there too. And the needs, besides food and security, transportation, and all of that, we also have a lot of mental health and domestic violence needs.
Yes, and I've been to your church on a few occasions, and it's a beautiful congregation and just a very diverse community, and the work you're doing is wonderful. And then I met Pastor Rhonda through Alyssa several years ago. And so I've been honored to kind of follow her working in her community in Prairie View at St. Francis. And it's a beautiful church. We've been there, and it's just a wonderful, special community there that the Pastor Rhonda is serving. So Pastor Rhonda, would you mind telling us a little bit about your church and your ministry?
Sure. So St. Francis of Assisi is in Prairie View, which, for those of you who may not know, is about 50 miles northwest of Houston. So between Buc-ee's and Brenham, for those who need some kind of visual to find the location. The church is in the community of Prairie View A&M University, which means it is a historically Black congregation. And the parishioners there are primarily educators, doctors, and people who are faculty either at the university or in the community in Prairie View or in Waller County. The area has also transitioned significantly from the way it was, in that most of the members of my congregation are retired. We also have a campus ministry. So we administer both pastoral care and faith-based teaching conversations with college students as well as sharing a meal. And we also provide food and other assistance to members of the community as needed. The congregation is aging. And so one of the issues we have is what happens to the ministries when everyone gets too old to do what they used to do. And that has made it a little difficult. The other thing this is about St. Francis of Assisi, it is known in Prairie View as being a place of safety. We share our space, meaning that we open our space up to other groups in the community to use our space for meetings or activities. This includes supporting the Boy Scouts, the retired teachers, the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority that's located out of the area, who provides assistance and entertainment for our seniors at least once a month.
That's wonderful. I mean, you're really between the both of you, you're just touching just the whole spectrum of our community. And I think it's such valuable. That's why I'm so thankful. And by the way, these amazing women are actually on a retreat today. And so just to show you their dedication that they answered this call and willing to share a little bit of time with me. But I have, like I said, I've been kind of caught over the last few years, serving in situations that I had not planned on being in, just out of the necessity of what was happening in the world and in the specific communities that we serve with the council. And both of you have been just instrumental in both inspiring me, supporting me, sharing your wisdom with me, and then participating in some of the different activities that are needed in our community. So thank you so much. So I had a few questions, and then I just really kind of want this to flow in whatever direction you feel is something that is important for people to listen to or understand your unique point of view. It's been 3 years since we formally recognized the COVID-19 pandemic. And you both were at a time in your life and your career that you were beginning a lot of your work. So this really thrusted you in a difficult, challenging situation. But what was, looking back now, the biggest challenge that you faced through this pandemic?
So in Prairie View and at St. Francis of Assisi, our biggest challenge was the loss of 2 of our ministries to the community. Mm. One was, we used to have the Houston Food Bank come to St. Francis of Assisi and distribute food to 160 to 200 individuals and or families. On a monthly basis, which had been multiple years of this. And so the minute the pandemic hit, that stopped. And so there's been no food distribution through the Houston Food Bank since before the pandemic, since January of 2019. And so that has been very, very hard because many of the people in St. Francis are college students who don't have vehicles. So driving to Hempstead or Waller, which is about 20 miles away, to go to one of the food distribution by the food bank or other entities there can be difficult. The second one, it was the loss of the men's prayer breakfast, which is more I call it an advocacy and awareness. So the Men of St. Francis fixed breakfast for however many people show up. We have an outside speaker and we talk about the issues that are of interest, everything from, it could be related to law and order or health or voting rights or rental rights. I mean, the topics are very, very broad, but it is a way to disseminate information to the community and have some dialogue and get some feedback about what are people concerned about. And we lost that, and that was a huge challenge for the parishioners and the community to kind of maneuver in that time without those things. And like I said, the food bank still has not come back. The Men's for Breakfast has resumed, so we've begun that work again. And then I guess the third thing was, and I won't go into a long discussion about it, but Prairie View does not have its own zip code. So there is no home delivery. So while everyone else was able to stay home when we were quarantining and isolating, the folks in Prairie View had to go out to go to the post office or wherever to still pick things up because they do not get home delivery because there's no zip code in Prairie View.
Oh,
And
wow.
that's a whole nother discussion that we don't have time for right now, but just that was also one of the challenges that the community faced.
Yeah, wow. I mean, those are big challenges, food, basic needs, and then the unique challenges of what we all had to go through during times of shut-ins and isolation. So absolutely. Pastor Lisa.
I was thinking about this. It's hard to answer what was the most challenging. Because what I'm finding that the intersectionality of things compounds the problem. So it's not one thing, but when everyone's locked at home and isolated, the domestic violence, and there's no resource. The church is often a safe place for a lot of these women to come to. And while they're at church, there's reprieve, there's people to hear their stories. We'd had a grant for a couple of years for mental health that was really working with these women, and that grant ran out. But you're intersecting, obviously food insecurity is a big thing. But is it more or less than how everything intersections with no transportation, food, childcare, mental health, physical, healthcare needs, all of those things just sort of, when the shutdown happens, it just crumbled. And so the challenge is bringing the community back. I'm bringing, resources and infrastructure back. And like Rhonda was kind of alluding to, pulling back what you had is very difficult right now, let alone making any progress in the community, while we're dealing, like, this inflation is impacting these communities heavily. And we've seen food needs we've been serving food. Well, Crossroads has been doing it at our church. They've been doing it even before they came to San Pablo. So I was talking to the director, and it's like always a steady incline of nothing sharp has happened, no sharp inclines, but there's never a dip. So the need for food in the community continues to grow and grow and grow at a steady pace. And so all of those things work together to bring just a whole communal kind of cocktail, if you will, of issues that are like the real problem. And which one do you address first when they all matter?
Absolutely. And I think that, as women of faith, you're pulling on all of your own personal resources and your own inner strength to kind of navigate and assess the landscape, and then connect, what you have for like you said, this ongoing need. At the beginning of the pandemic 3 years ago, there was so much confusion on all levels about how to begin to address it. There was already a huge gap in equity in health and public health and reaching different communities. Now that we have a chance to kind of have that retrospective look and kind of see what could have been different, what do you think as far as public health, if you had your way of changing things going forward, what could we have done differently with the public health initiatives at the beginning?
I think for our community, and I was also in Austin at the time too, so I saw this in two different places, Houston and Austin. Fear from underserved communities, and especially people of color, of distrust of, because of the experimentation done on people and things like that, being able to communicate the real and present danger of COVID and the need for, vaccination and preventative care, and safety. You'll see a lot of masks still being worn in these communities. They were hit hard by COVID. And when you don't have a trusted system of communication or healthcare, that has a devastating effect on these communities. And I don't know, beforehand, and of course it will be for the next health crisis that we have, right? Instilling trust. And I think churches have a lot to offer in this, because they can be places of trust that people have gathered before. And a lot of churches did have vaccination drives, and were hubs of distributing information. But again, transportation was a problem with getting that out when you're in lockdown.
Right. Pastor Rhonda?
I would say, for me, one of the issues was the confusion in the communication. I think it would have been much more helpful if the authorities that were disseminating information had just said, we have never seen this before. We're trying to figure it out, but this is what we know so far. As opposed to giving what I call false assurances that, oh, it's just like the, just like the flu or whatever. Because that added to the distrust that already existed, added to confusion, and people were unclear of what was the right thing to do. And oftentimes took unnecessary risks because they weren't sure who to believe. So I think that was part of the issues. I think the other part of it was there did not seem to be any organization where, one of the things Harvey was my first hurricane, just uses that example, right? Harvey was my first hurricane. And one of the things that I saw that actually surprised me, in all honesty, was how many agencies came together and set aside whatever their differences. I normally only do this, but everybody came together to try to help mitigate what was going on. And I did not see that or feel that in the same way with COVID. It was a lot more finger pointing, and and that was not helpful whatsoever. That was not helpful whatsoever.
Absolutely. I would agree with you. I having gone through both a natural disaster and then the pandemic, there was definitely a very different feel to collaborative efforts, partnerships, and trying to figure out where each organization or entity belonged in this, ongoing, challenge. And I think it did make it confusing. It made it confusing for those of us out there trying to serve, and then especially for the communities that have all the fear that you mentioned. Do you see now this, at this point where we are today, do you see your church members or your community adjusting? How do you see this period that we're in right now, as far as mental health, as far as the physical health? You both mentioned the challenges that the ongoing challenges you have. But how do you, and in addition to that, where do you feel we need to be dedicating our resources?
So in our community, what I see is we're still COVID aware. People still wear masks. We still distance. We have still retained some of the practices that we've had all along. And not as far away, not as distant as we used to be. We're like 3 feet now instead of 6. But we're still very cautious because of the virus. And we have a campus right across the road from us, right in Prairie View. So the fluidity of the students coming from all over the world, we have to be conscious to potential exposure. As far as people have pretty much accepted that COVID is here forever. So they don't expect it to go away. So everybody's gotten their vaccinations. So they're starting to move a little bit normally, but with masks, with gloves. And so we can see that taking place. I think the difficult part still is how do we sustain the shift that COVID or repair the shift that COVID has generated. So everything still from just like what's happening with inflation, but that was predictable. You cannot shut down a pipeline and create a supply demand imbalance and not expect inflation, right? And there was no plan in place beforehand, even though it was predictable. And so what's happening from a mental health perspective is that people there's added anxiety, there's added stress. And one of the things that doesn't get talked about enough, in my opinion, is there is a level of ongoing grief because of what people have experienced or not experienced. People are used to grieving the death of a loved one or a friend, but there's also grief about the things that people lost, whether it's their graduations or their wedding plans or their vacations or access to something that they found comforting that they lost during the time of the quarantines and isolations. And they haven't been processed through. So we're seeing those effects ongoing, not just in my community, but I see it throughout my travels.
Yeah, I think we underestimate, even in ourselves as leaders, the effect that anxiety and stress had on us. I mean, I know I haven't experienced the longevity of the anxiety like I have with coming out during COVID and then coming out of it. And in our community, there was a lot of religious misinformation. So people did not get vaccinated. And they were fearing the vaccine because it was, they're told many stories, conspiracy theory, and often some kind of religious base to them. And so they're not vaccinated, and a belief of you need to have enough faith, to pray this away kind of thing. And I'm generalizing a lot of different theories here, but that was really problematic in our community. But I think that coming out, we have some real serious, we already had mental health needs, but there's a level of anxiety, communal energy anxiety that still is there, as sort of pervasive throughout the congregation and the surrounding community. And how do we reconnect? I think when people are in isolation and disconnected, I believe we're made to be, interrelated with each other, right? And we always think we're individuals, but we're not. We're created for interaction with one another to thrive. And that thriving is what has taken a hit. And so we're existing, surviving. And I think we're still there in many ways. And our seniors were so isolated, who tend to get isolated anyway, were very much cut off, and loved ones died and they were left alone. And we got a grant for a year to do we're doing monthly just getting together, gather them all up. I rent a band, we go do something fun. And they're, just the conversation in the band, they're like reconnecting, finding reason to be together again. And that is benefiting their health, both mentally and physically, helping them to find, to get away from some of that isolation and reconnect.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think that's that was very much revealed through the pandemic. Unlike I mean, the natural disasters revealed it too, but this pandemic put us in very strange spaces mentally and physically. The isolation, like you said, the ongoing isolation and the ongoing stress and the grieving and the fear. Now, how are you incorporating the concept of public health? Because to me, that was the first thing that I realized was not there when this pandemic struck, was there was not that consistent, ready to mobilize, public health network system that I think, assumed was there. So we realized that each state and each county was doing its own thing, and everybody was trying to figure it out, but no one really understood what we were dealing with. Has the concept of public health changed through this, and how were you each incorporating that concept in your ministry? How is it related to the faith?
Well, I was blessed that we were kind of in a unique bubble being in Prairie View, in that one of my parishioners is the medical director at Prairie View A&M University, and I have another parishioner who is a retired physician, and I have two parishioners who are professors of biology at the university. So they became our public health resource. And then also early in the pandemic, our diocesan bishop, the Right Reverend Andrew Doyle, and his team of resources, I mean, he pulled stuff from everywhere. We would get ongoing information that kind of helped form the skeleton of things you needed to consider. So at St. Francis, we started out from a place of having a well-organized conversation about how do we protect everyone because of having those physicians and biologists in the church. Mm-hmm. And so we did not have the same issues that some of our other cities and counties, when the numbers would go up. I mean, we kind of were able to be slightly ahead of the game, and it hasn't gone away. I mean, we still, one of the things that at least I still do, and leadership at the church still does, is we rely on those folks. Okay, this is what's happening. These are the questions we have. Help us piece together what is the best way to respond. And he's, done that with, including helping that in the city of Prairie View as well. So we were kind of lucky to be in a little bubble of our own where we ignored a lot of the other outside information and developed a strategy that worked very, very, very well. We did not, up until just recently, we had gone the entire 2+ years without a single case at the church.
Wow.
Because of the church, we had people that had contracted it outside, like because of work or whatever. But until just a couple of months ago, we had not had anyone inside the church contract anything at church. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. By following the protocols. And the minute we relaxed them, so now we're back,
Right.